The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom dripped light onto a sea of curated perfection. Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Strategic, stood on a balustrade balcony overlooking the gala she was hosting, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. Below, men in bespoke tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns laughed with the practiced ease of the city's elite. The event, a fundraiser for the Children's Art Foundation, was a resounding success, another jewel in the crown of her meticulously constructed empire. Yet, from her vantage point, the scene looked like a silent film, the sound of celebration failing to penetrate the thick glass of her solitude. Why, after clawing her way to the apex of this glittering world, did she feel so profoundly alone? Her penthouse was a sterile gallery of success, her calendar a fortress against intimacy. This gala was just another room in that fortress. Down on the main floor, Samuel Jones adjusted the knot on his borrowed bow tie. He shouldn't have been there. He was part of the catering team, a last-minute call-in for a friend who'd fallen ill. His daughter, Maya, sat quietly in the staff break room, a coloring book and a set of well-loved crayons her only companions. Bringing her had been an act of desperation. The sitter had canceled, and the money from this one shift was the difference between making rent and falling behind. He felt a familiar pang of guilt, a quiet ache for the life he'd once imagined for her. He was a carpenter and artisan, but the world valued speed over substance, and his small workshop was barely staying afloat. He possessed an integrity as solid as the oak he worked with, but integrity didn't pay the bills. "Just check on the hors d'oeuvres one last time, Jones," the catering manager hissed, his face a mask of stress. Samuel nodded, his expression calm. He was moving toward the kitchen when the ballroom doors burst open. The sudden violence of the sound was a hammer blow against the delicate symphony of the party. 3 figures in black, faces obscured by ski masks, stormed into the room. One brandished a handgun, firing a single, deafening shot into the ornate ceiling. Plaster dust rained down like bitter snow. "Nobody move!" the leader roared, his voice amplified by the room's stunned silence. Panic erupted. A woman screamed. A glass shattered. The silent film of Eleanor's life suddenly had sound, and it was terrifying. Her first instinct was pure, cold analysis. Assess the threat, find the exit. But her feet were rooted to the spot, her body betraying her formidable mind. Down below, Samuel's reaction was the opposite. He didn't run. He didn't freeze. His first and only thought was of Maya. He moved with a swift, silent grace, not toward an exit, but back toward the staff area, his body a shield against the rising tide of chaos. He reached the door, slipped inside, and knelt before his daughter. Maya's wide, dark eyes were fixed on him, her small hands holding a purple crayon mid-stroke. She hadn't made a sound. She rarely did. He put a finger to his lips, his gaze steady and reassuring. "It's just a game, sweet pea," he whispered, his voice a low, calming anchor. "A loud, silly game of statues. We're going to be very, very still. Can you do that for Daddy?" Maya gave a solemn, trusting nod. He wrapped her in his arms, his body a fortress more real than any Eleanor had ever built. The chaos in the ballroom had a life of its own. Guests were being herded into the center of the room, their glittering jewelry and expensive watches being stripped from them and tossed into duffel bags. Eleanor, still trapped on the balcony, was spotted. One of the robbers started toward the marble staircase, his movements aggressive and predatory. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. Down below, hidden from the main line of sight, Samuel had a decision to make. Stay hidden with Maya or intervene. He saw the fear on the CEO's face, a stark, human terror that stripped away the layers of wealth and power. It was the same fear he saw in the mirror some nights. He couldn't leave her. It wasn't in his nature. Leaving Maya for even a moment felt like tearing a part of himself away. But he looked at her trusting face and knew she'd be safe if she stayed quiet. "I'll be right back, my love." Stay a statue, he slipped out of the room, moving along the wall, using the chaos as cover. The robber was halfway up the stairs. Samuel grabbed a heavy, silver serving tray from a deserted trolley. It wasn't a weapon, not really, but it was solid. He didn't shout. He didn't charge. He waited for the precise moment the robber's back was turned, then brought the tray down with focused force against the back of the man's knee. The robber buckled with a cry of pain and surprise, his leg giving way. He tumbled down the remaining stairs, his gun clattering across the marble floor. The leader of the crew turned, his attention diverted for a critical second. It was all the time the police, alerted by a silent alarm, needed. The main doors crashed open again, this time revealing tactical officers. The robbery was over as quickly as it had begun. In the aftermath, the ballroom was a landscape of shock and relief. Paramedics tended to the shaken, police took statements, and the quiet hum of crisis management replaced the earlier panic. Eleanor was escorted down from the balcony, a coarse blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a useless shield against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Her eyes scanned the room, not for her board members or her society friends, but for the man in the simple black uniform who had acted when everyone else had frozen. She found him near the service corridor, kneeling again, his back to the chaos. He was holding his daughter, rocking her gently, his low voice a soothing murmur. Maya's face was buried in his shoulder, her small body trembling slightly. Eleanor approached them, her expensive heels silent on the debris-strewn floor. Is she all right? Eleanor asked, her own voice sounding foreign and thin. Samuel looked up. His face was etched with fatigue, but his eyes were clear and steady. We're okay. She was very brave. He smoothed Maya's hair. This is my daughter, Maya. Eleanor knelt down, ignoring the risk to her silk gown. She looked at the little girl, whose wide, soulful eyes peered at her from the safety of her father's embrace. Hello, Maya. You were very brave indeed. Maya offered no response, simply watching her with an unnerving stillness. Thank you, Eleanor said, her gaze returning to Samuel. The words felt inadequate, flimsy. What you did? You were incredibly calm. He gave a small, weary shrug. Panic is a luxury. When you have someone depending on you, you don't have the option. He paused, looking at the scene around them. Fear is a fire. You can let it burn you down, or you can use it to see more clearly in the dark. His quiet wisdom settled over her, a stark contrast to the hollow aphorisms of the business world. Here was a man who seemed to be made of something more solid, more real, than anyone she had ever met. I'm Eleanor Vance. I owe you a debt I can't possibly repay. No debt, he said simply. Just glad everyone is safe. I'm Samuel Jones. He stood, helping Eleanor to her feet. Their hands brushed, and for a fleeting moment, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the stuffy ballroom. It was in this quiet, fractured moment, surrounded by the wreckage of her perfect evening, that a tentative connection began to form, a single, hopeful sprout pushing through the concrete of her well-guarded life. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor couldn't shake the image of Samuel's quiet courage. She found the name of the catering company and learned he wasn't a permanent employee. With a little more digging, the kind her executive assistant was an expert at, she found his name attached to a small business, Jones Woodcraft, a workshop. She told herself it was about repaying the debt. That was the official reason she drove her gleaming black sedan to a part of the city, her car's navigation system designated with a slight air of disapproval. The workshop was a modest brick building tucked between a laundromat and a bakery. The air inside smelled of cedar and sawdust and something else. Something like peace. Samuel was there, planing a long piece of maple, the muscles in his forearms moving with practiced rhythm. He looked up, surprised, as the bell over the door chimed. Ms. Vance, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I wasn't expecting to see you. Please call me Eleanor. She looked around at the beautiful, half-finished pieces of furniture. A rocking chair with an impossibly elegant curve, a bookshelf that seemed to flow up the wall. This is your work? It's incredible. It's what I do, he said with a humble pride. Maya was in a corner, carefully sanding a small block of wood, her movements mimicking her father's. She glanced at Eleanor and gave a small, shy wave. Eleanor got to the point, or what she pretended was the point. I'd like to commission something. A desk. For my home office. Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly. I'm sure you could find. I want you to make it, she interrupted, her tone more forceful than she intended. Please. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze discerning. It was as if he could see past the CEO and into the lonely woman beneath. All right, Eleanor. I'll make you a desk. This became her excuse. She visited the workshop under the guise of checking on the desk's progress. She'd bring coffee and they would talk. She learned about his wife, Sarah, who had died in a car accident 3 years prior. He spoke of her with a love so profound it was a living presence in the room. She was the one who taught me about being calm, he said one rainy afternoon. The sound of the downpour a gentle percussion on the workshop roof. She was a nurse. She'd come home from the emergency room and tell me how the most important thing in a crisis was to breathe. Just breathe. After she was gone, she stopped talking. The doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response. I promised Sarah I'd always be a rock for her. So I learned to breathe for both of us. The confession was delivered so simply, without a trace of self-pity. It was a statement of fact, a piece of his history offered as gently as a cup of tea. Eleanor felt something inside her crack open. This man had faced unimaginable loss and was raising his daughter through a silent grief. Yet he radiated a strength she, with all her resources, had never been able to purchase. She found herself looking at a small, neglected planter box in the alley behind his workshop, filled with withered stems and weeds. "Does anything grow here?" she asked, changing the subject, feeling too exposed. "Not for a long time," he said, following her gaze. The next day, she came back not with coffee, but with bags of potting soil and a tray of small, hopeful-looking flower seedlings. She didn't ask. She just knelt by the box and started pulling weeds. Maya came out and watched her, her head tilted. After a few minutes, the little girl knelt beside her and began to help, her small fingers carefully patting the soil around a marigold. Samuel watched them from the doorway, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. They worked in a comfortable silence, a team of 3 restoring a tiny patch of forgotten earth. As they worked, Eleanor felt the knots in her own shoulders begin to loosen. The smell of the damp soil was more real than any perfume she owned. The simple joy of this small, shared task was a feeling so foreign and so welcome it almost brought tears to her eyes. Their routine solidified. The desk was an ongoing project, a beautiful excuse. Their conversations deepened. She told him about the pressures of her job, the emptiness of her victories. He listened, truly listened, his quiet attention a balm. He never offered easy solutions, only a steady presence that made her feel, for the first time, that she didn't have to be invincible. He showed her how to use a wood lathe, guiding her hands with his own. The calloused warmth of his skin, a stark contrast to the cold metal and glass of her world. One evening, as they sat on a bench he'd made, watching Maya draw constellations on the sidewalk with chalk, he asked a gentle question. "What are you so afraid of, Eleanor?" The question landed right in the center of her carefully guarded heart. The rain had started again, a soft drizzle this time. They moved inside, and the smell of coffee and wood filled the small kitchen of his apartment above the shop. The space was warm, cluttered with life. Maya's drawings on the fridge, a stack of library books, a half-finished puzzle on the table. It was a home. Looking around, Eleanor felt the stark emptiness of her own penthouse apartment like a physical blow. "Betrayal," she finally answered, her voice low. "I built my company with my fiancé. Or I thought I did. We were partners in life, in business. We were a week from sending our final proposal for our first major venture capital pitch. I woke up one morning and he was gone. So was the business plan. He'd pitched it himself the day before under his own name, cutting me out completely. He took everything. My work, my trust, my heart. He told me business was just business." Her voice was flat, devoid of the rage that had fueled her for years. "So I rebuilt. I started over, and I swore I would never be that vulnerable again. I would be stronger, smarter, and I would never, ever trust anyone that completely. She was confessing the origin story of the ironclad woman the world knew as Eleanor Vance. Samuel didn't say, "I'm sorry." He just nodded, his expression full of an understanding that went beyond words. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "A heart isn't a fortress, Eleanor. It's a garden. If you wall it up, nothing can get in, but nothing can grow, either." Just as the walls around Eleanor's heart were beginning to crumble, the ghost of her past materialized. Julian Croft, her ex-fiancé, was back. His company, now a major competitor, was the other finalist for the lucrative city redevelopment contract, the biggest project of Eleanor's career. His reappearance felt like a violation, a specter from her past threatening to poison her newfound peace. News of the Gala robbery had been in all the papers, and a society columnist had even printed a photo of Eleanor speaking with Samuel in the aftermath, romanticizing him as a working-class hero. Julian had seen it. He saw everything. He confronted her after a preliminary project hearing at City Hall. He was as polished and predatory as she remembered, his smile a weapon. "Eleanor, you're looking well. I see you've developed a taste for charity cases." He gestured vaguely with his chin, a clear reference to Samuel. "Stay away from me, Julian," she said, her voice colder than ice. "This contract is mine," he sneered, "but I'm feeling generous. I hear your new friend owns a small carpentry business. Buildings have codes. Workshops have safety inspections. It would be a shame if he got buried in fines and violations." A real shame. The threat was unmistakable, delivered with the casual cruelty she knew so well. "Drop your bid. Let my company take the contract, and your carpenter's little hobby shop will be just fine. Fight me on this, and I'll burn everything you care about to the ground. It's just business, after all." The ultimatum sent a chill of pure dread through her. Julian knew her weakness. It wasn't Samuel's business. It was Samuel himself. The thought of Julian's poison touching the pure, good world Samuel and Maya had built was unbearable. Her old self, the warrior forged in the fire of his betrayal, screamed at her to fight, to crush him, to use every ruthless tactic she had learned to destroy him once and for all. But a new, quieter voice whispered, "At what cost?" To fight Julian on his terms was to become him. It meant weaponizing her power, becoming the kind of person who saw people as collateral damage. It meant proving him right. The conflict tore her apart. She retreated, the old armor sliding back into place. She stopped visiting the workshop, telling Samuel she was swamped with work for the final proposal. Her calls became brief, her texts perfunctory. She was trying to protect him by pushing him away, but the distance felt like a betrayal in itself. Samuel didn't push, but she could hear the hurt and confusion in his patient silence. She was back in her penthouse, staring out at the city lights, feeling more isolated than ever before. She was trapped between the woman she had been and the woman she was starting to believe she could be. The choice Julian had given her was a crucible, and she feared the fire would consume her entirely, leaving nothing but the ashes of the ruthless executive she had fought so hard to become. The day of the final presentation to the city council arrived, a gray, overcast morning that mirrored Eleanor's soul. She sat at a long, polished table in the council chambers, her team on one side, Julian and his team on the other. She felt hollowed out. She had decided to withdraw her bid. It felt like a surrender, a bitter defeat, but the thought of Julian harassing Samuel, of inspectors swarming his small sanctuary, was a price she refused to pay. Her victory wasn't worth his peace. Julian presented first, his performance slick and confident. He spoke of profit margins and leveraging assets, his language cold and transactional. Then it was Eleanor's turn. She stood, her hands trembling slightly on her prepared notes. She looked at Julian's smug face and felt the old anger rise, but it was tempered by a new, deeper sorrow. She opened her mouth to announce her withdrawal. "Wait!" The voice was small, but it cut through the tense silence of the room. A side door opened, and Samuel walked in, holding Maya's hand. He must have known something was wrong. Her silence had been too loud. He had come. Eleanor's heart stopped. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Samuel said, his voice calm and steady as he addressed the council president. "My name is Samuel Jones. I'm a citizen of this city, and I'm a friend of Eleanor Vance's. I think there's something you all need to hear." Julian shot to his feet. "Security! Remove this man. He's not part of this hearing." But Samuel's quiet dignity held the room captive. He looked directly at Eleanor, his eyes full of a faith she didn't think she deserved. And then he looked down at his daughter. "Maya, sweet pea, is there something you want to tell Ellie?" Maya, who hadn't spoken a word to anyone but her father in 3 years, let go of his hand. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the podium where Eleanor stood frozen. She looked up at Eleanor, her small face serious. Then she looked toward Julian, her gaze unflinching. And she spoke, her voice clear and pure, filling the vast chamber. "You don't have to be scared, Ellie," she said. "He's the one who's small." The simple, profound truth of it shattered Eleanor's paralysis. Maya's voice, a miracle unlocked by love and trust, was a clarion call. In that instant, Eleanor Vance was reborn. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a protector. She set aside her prepared notes. She looked at the council, at Julian, at the city she wanted to help build. "My daughter is right," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound power. She didn't know she had claimed Maya as her own until the words were out, and she knew they were true. Mr. Croft's proposal is built on a foundation of threats and intimidation. He gave me an ultimatum: withdraw my bid, or he would use his influence to destroy Mr. Jones's small business. She laid out the threat, her voice unwavering. I was going to withdraw. I was going to let him win to protect people I care about. But that is not leadership. That is cowardice. A city is not just steel and glass, it is people. It is community. It is integrity. She turned to the council president. Vance Strategic is officially withdrawing its bid for the redevelopment contract. A gasp went through the room. Because my company will not participate in a process tainted by such corrupt and unethical behavior. We will, however, be submitting a formal complaint, with evidence, regarding Mr. Croft's attempt at blackmail. She had made her choice. She had not chosen to fight, nor to flee. She had chosen integrity. She had sacrificed the biggest contract of her career, not for revenge, but for a principle. She walked away from the podium, took Maya's small hand in hers, and walked with Samuel out of the chamber, leaving a stunned Julian Croft to face the consequences of his own rot. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. An investigation was launched into Julian's business practices, and the story of his blackmail attempt became a citywide scandal. His contract was suspended, his reputation shattered. But Eleanor paid it no mind. Her victory was not in his ruin, but in her own liberation. She walked with Samuel and Maya out of the cold stone of City Hall and into the soft afternoon light. The rain had stopped. Sunshine, pale but persistent, was breaking through the clouds. When they reached his workshop, she finally turned to him, her heart in her eyes. "I'm sorry for pushing you away. I was trying to protect you, but I just ended up hurting you." He simply smiled, that slow, warm smile that made her feel safe. "You don't have to protect me, Eleanor. You just have to stand with me." He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "I think the desk is finished." He led her inside. There, in the center of the room, was the most beautiful desk she had ever seen. It was made of rich, dark walnut, the grain flowing like water. It was strong and elegant, modern in its lines but timeless in its craftsmanship. On its surface sat a small, intricately carved wooden music box. He picked it up and wound the key. A delicate, hopeful melody filled the workshop. "It was broken," he said softly, "but the pieces were all there. It just needed some time, and a patient hand." Eleanor looked from the repaired music box to his face, and she finally understood. He hadn't just been building her a desk. He had been showing her how to rebuild a life. She stepped forward, into his arms, and for the first time in a decade, Eleanor Vance felt truly, completely whole. 1 year later, The sun streamed into the alley behind the workshop, illuminating a riot of color. The small, once neglected planter box was now a thriving garden, overflowing with marigolds, lavender, and bright red zinnias. Eleanor, dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt, laughed as Maya used a small watering can to give a thirsty-looking bee a drink. Samuel came out of the workshop, wiping sawdust from his hands, and wrapped his arms around Eleanor from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood together, watching their daughter tend to the life they had nurtured. Eleanor was still a CEO, but she ran her company differently now. She'd launched a foundation to support local artisans, with Jones Woodcraft as its first and most celebrated partner. Her penthouse was sold. She now lived in the apartment above the shop, its rooms filled with laughter, the smell of cooking, and the beautiful, imperfect clutter of a family. Her heart was no longer a fortress but a garden, open and thriving, its gates unlocked for good. She had learned that true strength wasn't about building walls to keep the world out, but about having the courage to let the right people in. True wealth, she now knew, wasn't measured by the height of your skyscraper, but by the depth of your connections and the simple, priceless feeling of being home.